Warning: this video contains spoilers for The Babadook. Part 1: What is The Babadook? The Babadook is a 2014 Australian horror movie directed by Jennifer Kent that follows the story of Amelia and Sam, mother and son. Amelia is going through a crisis because she has to work her day job at a hospital while trying to take care of Sam, who is being more difficult than usual because Sam is creating contraptions that he uses as weapons against his colleagues in school. He is 6 years old, and she's also dealing with terrible grief because of the loss of her husband on the same day that Sam was born. One night, she's going to read a book before Sam goes to bed, and she finds this book titled Mr. Babadook on the shelf. She didn't know what it was, but it's clearly a children's book, a children's pop-up book with cute images. She starts reading it before knowing exactly what it's going to be, and it's a dark story about a monster that is not going to let go and who's going to kill all of the household. And soon enough, Babadook, the monster, becomes a real entity, tormenting, terrorizing, and making the life of Amelia and Sam into a nightmare. Part 2: My emotional reaction to the Babadook. Hi, welcome to Vanessa Jupiter's sitting room. My name is Vanessa Jupiter, and I talk about horror movies quite often on this channel. The Babadook is a special case. I'll never forget the experience of watching it for the first time in theaters. Around the half-hour mark, I remember myself curling into a ball and crying desperately. As a child, I was always scared of the dark. As a child, I was very scared of most things. The Babadook tapped into my fears of childhood like no other movie ever has before or since. I couldn't sleep before dawn for 3 days after the Babadook because I couldn't stop being afraid of the dark again, like I was when I was a kid. I love horror movies. This feeling, curling myself into a ball, crying, being completely scared, is what I'm looking for. It was the scariest movie I've ever watched. When talking about movies, very often we try to rationalize what we like about them, what we don't like about them. With The Babadook, it's particularly difficult because what I like about it is the way that it makes me feel like a child again. Part 3: What is The Babadook? Amelia's neighbor, Mrs. Roach, is a kind figure that we see sometimes throughout the movie. It's possible to see her living room from Amelia's kitchen, and as Amelia is starting to be haunted by the Babadook, we have seen glimpses of the Babadook. We have seen shadows, we have seen his costume, bits here and there. As she's in her kitchen, Amelia looks through her window. Amelia sees Mrs. Roach watching television. She looks down, she looks back up, and the Babadook is there, standing right next to Mrs. Roach. Everything about the way that the Babadook is presented, the actual entity, works perfectly for me. I am afraid of his costume. I am afraid of his figure. I am afraid of the fact that he lurks in the shadows. I am afraid of the fact that he showed up in Amelia's neighbor's house first. I am afraid of the way that he's inside the television. I am afraid of the way that he pulls you into him. I am afraid of the way that he tricks you. I am so afraid of the way that he makes darkness seem larger than it actually is. I am afraid of the way that he makes darkness be more threatening than it should be. The simple fact that the Babadook is created from a children's book is so scary because it brings the creepiness back to childhood. It pulls me back into the space that I was in when I was a kid. Part 4: The best ending. The conclusion of the story of the Babadook is when Amelia decides to keep him in her basement and feeds him sometimes and takes care of him. When I was a teenager, I wrote some short stories. One of them in particular, someone was being terrorized by a monster the entire night, and in the conclusion of the story, when this person finally confronted the monster, they embraced the monster. I never understood what that ending meant until I finally watched the Babadook. I never understood what that monster was. To see a fantasy that I felt was so close to my own, portrayed on a big screen, it was nothing short of magical. Part 5. What is the Babadook? The Babadook is, and has always been, a metaphor for mental health. People can read whatever they want into movies, but the Babadook is one of the examples of horror movies where the allegory couldn't be clearer. Amelia is dealing with grief, and this grief has been turned so large, this grief has become so overpowering that it is affecting her entire life. It is not allowing her to exist in her own home. It is not allowing her to have a good relationship with her neighbors. It has turned her abusive towards her child, and it has destroyed her entire life. I find it telling that my reaction to watching The Babadook was to cry so much, because the story of Amelia and Sam is indeed extremely sad. It is terrifying, and the darkness does look like it could consume both of them. But at the core of it, it is an extremely sad story about mental health and about how to overcome your own problems. Thank you.